You've asked me to talk about the sculptures today, and Cézanne, of course, said you have the paintings, you don't really need to talk about them, they speak for themselves. My sources of inspiration are in nature, and we're looking at some pieces now that are a result of this process. You start with drawings, and you make a number of drawings, and you look them over and you edit, and then make sort of definitive studies, and then sort of based on your response to the studies, emotional or visceral or however you wish, non-intellectual I guess is the phrase I'd use, go right in and make the sculpture. And the best ones are the drawings that are still wet when I take them out of my drawing studio and take them down to where I make sculpture and hang them up. It's very simple. You just sort of basically translate a shape in the drawing like this green shape here, which we have, into a shape on the metal like this shape right here. And you make changes when you're working on it, because it just has to look right, and when you make it as a sculpture, it may be certainly different from what the drawing was. The drawing is really kind of like a road map. It's sort of a guide, and it sort of sets you on your way. When you're making the sculpture, that's the real trip, no pun intended, and that's where you make it so it really all works together. And from the drawing, you translate basically the three-dimensionality of the piece itself, whereby a shape like this one here is going to be translated into this here, and this one is going to be extended. You have to kind of view the drawings like you would view an X-ray, as though it's something you could sort of see through and see the shapes, the way they kind of interrelate with one another, and yet form an entity or a whole. This is very similar to a piece we're doing for the University of Notre Dame right now. It's color-coded, but also the colors work very well together, and you can sort of see how these shapes, or you can imagine in your own way how the shapes will work one with the other and interact with one another. If it were a colored piece, I'd use color also, but it may not and probably wouldn't be the way the colors are going to come out on the piece itself.
I'm thinking of the reliefs.
I have a vague presentiment of how I want to have the shapes interact, and then the actual interaction of the shapes comes about as a result of how I really feel about the shapes and what color I feel each individual shape should be. Now that sounds pretty subtle, but it is. I mean, I just sort of have a feeling that this shape is best red, all right? If this one is best red, what's this one best? This one is best blue. And then you've got to make the red and the blue work together with the green or the yellow or the orange that you have in between. That's the formula there. And then phase 2 would be working with a small model, make a maquette about this high. That's a scale model. 1 inch on the model would equal 1 foot on the finished sculpture. And you look the model over pretty carefully. Maybe make another, might make a series. I mean, I've made up to half a dozen for a particular commission if I want to sort of resolve it. And usually the commissions are designed for a specific place. The one I'm working on right now for the Snite Museum at Notre Dame was designed in consultation with the director and the curator. And looking at the site, made the models. We decided upon a definitive model. Then step 3 would be going to make the large-scale piece. And that can be anywhere from, I'll say, 6 to 30 feet high. Most of the pieces I have around here don't exceed a height of, 8 or 10 feet. Some go maybe 16. But on a real large-scale piece, it would be 25 to 30 feet high. And you go with the model and enlarge it by a very sophisticated means such as computer, which will take a scale drawing and will give you a full-size inch to a foot enlargement of the shape that you wish to have, or else I will make up an actual enlarged pattern of the shape I wish to have, and then go from there to the actual factory where it's to be fabricated. The steel comes in plates about 10 feet wide and 20 to 30 feet long. And again, if it's a very sophisticated operation, they will have an electric eye machine which traces a line from the pattern to a concurrent line with a burning torch, and so that every little index and gesture of the patterned line will come out as a cut in the half-inch plate of steel, because normally we use half-inch thick steel on large pieces. Then we put it all together. Put all the pieces that have been cut out, some of them may weigh up to a ton apiece, each piece, with a crane, assemble them, and decide how the configuration is going to be, how each shape is going to interact with another and with the whole thing. So that, as with any sculpture, the acid test is, when you walk around it, is it sort of different? Does it sort of reveal itself in a new and different way as you change from the 360 degrees trajectory? When you've gotten it all together, and you've decided you're going to move one plate, as we did last week in Michigan, 2 inches, and it takes a half an hour to move it because it's so heavy, and you have to get people in there to cut it and move it and balance it and put it back in place again, but it looks just right when it's been moved to 2 inches. Then you go in and make gussets. A gusset is a piece we put in to basically reinforce 2 steel plates. You have engineering studies that are done on these models, and they tell you that between these 2 plates you have to have some sort of reinforcement, and so the generic phrase is gusset, and so we just put one in, keeping in mind that it's got to look okay with the finished piece itself. You draw on the piece to indicate where reinforcing members will be located, because this is going to be all part of the visual thing that you see, and it's all got to work together. Even though it might not be indicated like on your original drawing, you wouldn't put in things like gussets because they come afterwards. And then you stand back and let the men who are skilled and in whom you have confidence go ahead and do their task. I will also do actual cutting on the piece to get the line. As I told the people there, I want the line to be just as crisp as the line in a sail when it's under full power in a sailboat. Just as taut and strong as that in the sculptures. So you try to get that effect. Then the workmen go back to it and they do all the necessary welding because you have literally, hundreds of yards of welding that has to be done. They'll attach the flanges under your direction. They'll cut the gussets to shape and weld and attach those. The piece is then ground. It's sandblasted to remove all the mill scale. It's got a couple of coats of primer paint put on. Then the paint itself, and you've already decided what color or colors it's going to be. Then it's put on a flatbed trailer, trucked to the site, and with a crane, part of it's assembled on the trailer itself. It just makes it a little easier to do. You pick it up like you'd pick up a little toy out of a child's box, except that this is not a toy and it's not little. And you bring it over and you sort of put it down on the foundation, which has been precast and set, because concrete has to set 2 weeks before you can put any weight on it in order for it to, and also pre-designed. And with luck, if you set it down and it's just the way you want it. Without luck, then you tell the crane operator a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, till you get it exactly the way you want it. And then you go about securing it to the foundation, which is a question of attaching anchor plates, which are about foot square with 1-inch holes in them in each corner. And these are welded to the bottom of the piece. And then bolts will go down into the foundation itself and be secured. And usually we cover everything over with about a foot of ground, so that the sculpture actually seems to just rise right out of the ground or right out of the concrete. And that's how you go about it. In my most recent catalog at the University of Notre Dame exhibition, I ended up the preface by saying my sources of inspiration are in nature. They're also in everything I see. You might see something just in passing or crossing a street in the city or wherever it might be, and that registers with you and becomes a part of an object that you might do the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year. It's all kind of part of this sort of indeterminable vocabulary of shapes and forms that, as an artist, you try to put together and make a piece of sculpture. At some pieces now that are a result of this process, where I start with a sort of a combined set of forms or shapes and make them all work together. That sounds very simple. In essence, it is very simple, but the reality is that when you are in the working process, it can be rather difficult and time-consuming and subject to many false starts and corrections until ultimately, like, if I may use this gilded analogy, a piece of gold in a furnace comes out a pure form of metal, then ultimately it comes out a pure form of sculpture or work of art. Well, it might start with something like a shape like this, which is, you know, just an ordinary leaf, but sometimes you see a leaf in such a way that it's no longer ordinary, and it strikes a kind of a resonance, much as you might have a tuning fork that hits a particular pitch. Shadows to me are rather an intriguing format. To me they are sort of transformed shapes. They are the original shape or form that's been modified in such a way that it's something new. It has kind of a new being to it. And when I make the sculptures, I look to try to create a new being out of these things which I've seen, which are fairly mundane, you know, like this maple leaf, or ordinary that we see in our lives. But my intent is to make it into something new that sort of arrests one and makes one want to sort of look at it and understand it. I wanted to make large-scale pieces that would work out of doors. These flat metal pieces, the forms are suggested, and the use of color, I think, kind of amplifies the idea of the way the shape should be, because I'm really quite choosy about which shape gets which color. I use color to create the best harmony between the color and the shapes that make up the piece, and that will vary with every piece. It makes, almost in spite of its dissonance, you know, a red against a green against a light yellow, like in that piece over there, it creates its own harmony. Well, what makes you decide upon, you know, using orange for this shape or using yellow for this shape? To me, that's what the particular shape dictates. That it should be red, it should be orange, it should be blue, and that's how I use the color. This is the field of sculptures which I call vertical motifs. People see them as all sorts of different things. I see them as vertical motifs. That doesn't disallow the interpretations that people read into them. I think that's really kind of a wonderful thing about works of art, that you can have a variety of interpretations from just maybe one singular object.